Today on the Crucible Podcast, we'll be discussing whether people are right or wrong and holding to their convictions. The two people we will be focusing on today are John Proctor from the Crucible and Adnan Saeed from Serial. Now, both of these characters held to their convictions and maintained their innocence. Our first person, John Proctor, was in the Crucible. The Crucible occurred in the small community of Salem around 1692 and 1693. Now, what occurred was the Salem witch trials. These trials were the trials of people that were accused of being witches and using witchcraft. It started when a few girls became sick and were acting very strange. This led to both women and men being accused of being witches. The townspeople used anything they had against you and anything that you did or said against you. These events eventually led to John Proctor being accused of using witchcraft, which then led to him being arrested and convicted to hang. Now, John Proctor would not confess to using witchcraft the whole time while he was sitting in jail. John eventually did end up confessing to using witchcraft only after his wife, Elizabeth Proctor, had convinced him to confess and move on with his life. This led him to confess to using witchcraft. When he confessed, he had to sign his name to his confession. This meant that he was saying that he truly had used witchcraft, which in fact he had never did or used anything of the sort. By John Proctor signing his name to his confession, he would have been able to move on with his life and put everything behind him. However, he would have been living a lie, because he had never used any witchcraft. Once John signed his confession, the court wanted him to turn his neighbors and friends in for being witches and using witchcraft. John decided to make the decision to not rat out his friends and neighbors, because he knew that he and they had never had anything to do with witches or witchcraft. When John made this decision, he also made the decision to tear up his confession. John made the decision to tear up his confession because he had finally realized that by not turning other people in, he was being an honest man for once in his life. John needed to be honest. He proves his honesty when he says, "God does not need my name nailed upon the church. God knows how black my sins are." By saying this, he was saying that God himself already knew the bad things that John had done in his life, but no one else needed to know them. So John needed to be honest because he wanted everyone to think of him as an honest man instead of a liar. Now, John also says that, "How may I live without my name? I have given you my soul. Leave me my name." When John is saying this, his meaning is that he has already given up his name to his confession, and he doesn't want to have to live with a tarnished name after confessing. John Proctor was right in holding to his conviction. He was right in doing this because he knew that he himself was innocent and had nothing to do with witchcraft. When John Proctor tore up his confession, he knew that he was going to be hanged and die. Now, even though he knew he was going to die, John made the decision because he wanted to die an honest man. If he would have went ahead with his confession, he would have had to live with knowing that he was living with and in a lie, which is why he made the decision to tear up his confession and die an honest man instead of a liar. John was right in sticking to his conviction because he wanted to be honest once in his life, and he would rather die as an honest man instead of living his life as a liar. Moving on to our next person, we will be discussing Adnan Saeed. Adnan was convicted of murdering his ex-girlfriend. This all began when Adnan's ex-girlfriend was found dead. Adnan was pointed out to be the prime suspect in the investigation. He was eventually arrested and charged with her murder. Adnan then went to trial and maintained his innocence. He ended up being convicted of murder and was sentenced to life in prison. His conviction was helped by evidence that was not substantial and really could not prove that he had had anything to do with her murder. Yet he was still convicted. During his trial, Adnan never testified. This both hurt and helped him. It hurt him because he did not stand up and try to explain why he was innocent. And it helped him because if he really was innocent, then what was he going to say or do to prove that? Adnan maintained his innocence then, and Adnan still maintains his innocence today. Adnan was right in maintaining his innocence and sticking to his convictions. He was right in sticking to his convictions because he knows that he is actually innocent and did nothing wrong. Adnan morally feels that sticking to his conviction and maintaining his innocence is the right decision for him to make. It is the right decision to make because he is staying true to himself and staying honest to himself instead of living his life in a lie. In the end, I will leave it to you to decide whether you think that John Proctor and Adnan Syed were right or wrong in sticking to their convictions and maintaining their innocence, although it sure looks like they were both right in making the decisions that they made. They were right because they both stayed honest and true to themselves and kept themselves from living in a lie. In conclusion, that is why John Proctor and Adnan Syed were both right in sticking to their convictions and maintaining their innocence. Thank you for watching this podcast. This podcast was written and produced by Tucker Pearson for Mrs. Freeman's College 11 English class.